This is the story of a group of members from Special Operations Australia who travelled from Exmouth to Singapore, sunk or damaged 7 ships, then travelled home, all without a casualty. Modern Singapore was founded in 1819 by Sir Stamford Raffles as a trading post for the British Empire, and by 1867 was under direct control of Britain. After World War I, Britain built the Singapore Naval Base, which had the world's largest dry dock and the world's third largest floating dock. In December 1941, the Japanese attacked the US naval base at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese followed Pearl Harbor up with attacks on Thailand and Hong Kong. Then in January 1942, the invasion of British Burma, the Dutch East Indies, New Guinea and Malaysia. With the taking of Malaysia, the Japanese had access to the back door of Singapore, which was weakly defended as the British had expected a frontal attack. And by February 15, 1942, the garrison in Singapore had surrendered, even though they had outnumbered the Japanese by nearly 3-1. Winston Churchill called the surrender the biggest capitulation in British history. Operation Jaywick was carried out by Special Operations Australia that came into being in 1943 after a restructure of the clandestine units by Thomas Blaney. The cover name is the Services Reconnaissance Department. Major Ivan Lyon was born on August 17, 1915. He was commissioned into the Gordon Highlanders, an infantry regiment of the British Army that was founded in 1881. Lyon was posted to Singapore in 1935. In the lead-up to the fall of Singapore, he helped to evacuate civilians. He was ordered to Sumatra to organise a route across the island that could be used by the military as a relief route should Singapore come under siege by the Japanese. It was in Sumatra where he met Bill Reynolds. Bill Reynolds. There wasn't much information about him. He was a bit of a man of mystery and a man of adventure. We do know he was an Australian who had served on destroyers in World War I, then lived in parts of Asia for the next couple of decades. At around 50, he volunteered his services at the British Naval HQ in Singapore and took control of the Kufu Maru, which he used to ferry refugees out of Singapore to Sumatra, where he met Major Ivan Lyons, and they discussed ideas about getting back at the Japanese. Nothing further was done until they met again in India. Bill Reynolds had sailed the Kufu Maru to India from Sumatra. Reynolds then tried to sail the boat to Australia, but the engine kept breaking down and had to be shipped to Sydney on the top of a cargo ship. Major Herbert Allen Campbell, known as Jock Campbell, was a member of the King's Own Scottish Borderers that was founded in 1689 as a line infantry regiment. He was the administration officer that helped plan the operation along with Major Ivan Lyon. The Kufuku Maru is or was a Japanese coastal boat seized in Singapore when the war against the Japanese began. The boat is approximately 21 metres long and about 4 metres wide. The boat was renamed Crate after a poisonous Asian sea snake. Now, when Bill Reynolds was using this boat to evacuate refugees from Singapore, he noticed Japanese warplanes would not attack it. It was for this reason it was used to ferry the commandos from Australia to Singapore for the attack. While in India, Major Ivan Lyon devised a basic plan and took it to the Special Operations Executive India for approval. Lyon arrived in Australia with his approval in July 1942. Major Campbell followed in August 1942. They immediately started putting the plan into action. Australian naval authorities allowed personnel to be selected from a group of volunteers at the Flinders Naval Base in Victoria. These volunteers were told they'd be doing something exciting. The volunteers were first sent to a commando school near Frankston. Then out of that group of volunteers, a handful was selected and then was sent to Sydney, then on to a secluded area north of Sydney called Refuge Bay. It was known as Camp X. After a few more months of training, a handful of the trainees were selected and they boarded the Crate and headed for North Queensland. The remainder of the volunteers were left behind to clean up the camp, and all that remains is this plaque that sits on a rock wall. The Crate headed north along the eastern Australian coastline. When the crate neared a place called Fraser Island, which is north of Brisbane, it broke down and had to be towed to Townsville. While in Townsville, Bill Reynolds left the group and headed towards Melbourne, where he joined the clandestine Bureau of Economic Warfare. He took no further part in Operation Jaywick. While in Townsville, the crate had to get fitted with a new engine, which Major Lyon had managed to find in Tasmania. Once the engine had been replaced, the crate headed north again, first to stop at Cairns, where the boat was loaded up with fuel and supplies, before heading north to stop at Thursday Island, then around the northern Australian coastline, then down to Exmouth, Western Australia, where again fuel and supplies were loaded on board, along with the newly arrived collapsible canoes. As these photos show, there was nothing glamorous about the Exmouth Naval Base. It was literally a forward refuelling stop for submarines operating out of Fremantle, Western Australia. On September 1, 1943, the crate left Exmouth but suffered a broken propeller shaft, then returned and had help from the American crews nearby and was repaired, and then they left again the following afternoon. The boat headed north along the Western Australian coast, through the Lombok Strait, across the Java Sea, then along the south and west coasts of Borneo, then the western side of the Lingga Islands, and then anchored off Palau Pompong on the 16th of September. The island was considered unsafe as a launch point, so they spent the next 2 days looking for an alternative before settling on Palau Po Jang. 3 canoes were dispatched with 6 operatives in them. Then the crate headed back to Borneo. By the 22nd of September, the canoeists had reached Palau Dongus, about 8 miles south of Singapore Harbour. On the 24th of September, after seeing a collection of ships amassing nearby, an attack was attempted that night, but was called off after currents made the operation too difficult, so they moved to a better observation post on Palau Subar. On the evening of September 26th, they set out again. Canoe 1 and 3 left together, and they went to Palau Jung, and then they split up and went in different directions. Major Lyon commanded Canoe 1, and he headed to the examination anchorage, while Canoe 3 was commanded by Lieutenant Page. He headed for the western end of Keppel Harbour, while Canoe 2 was commanded by Lieutenant Davison. He went to the eastern end of Keppel Harbour. On the night of the attack, there was approximately 51 ships in harbour. Now, canoe number 1 was commanded by Major Lyon. He was to target the examination anchorage, but was unable to find a target due to the currents and the ships being blacked out. He finally found a tanker, Shushai Maru, that arrived in Singapore on September the 23rd and was damaged in the attack. It was repaired and operational again from December 17. Canoe number 2 was commanded by Lieutenant Davison. Now, he headed towards the eastern end of Keppel Harbour, managed to mine 3 ships. A rare Maru, which arrived in Singapore on September 21. It was sunk or heavily damaged, but it was salvaged, repaired, and it was back operational by December 29. Now, there were 2 other unidentified ships that were damaged. Now, one of them was the possibility it was Nichiru Maru. Now, that arrived on September 20, and it didn't depart again until the 11th. Now, radio traffic from Singapore picked up the possibility it was under repair, so that's why it's a possibility that was damaged during the attack. Now, canoe number 3 was commanded by Lieutenant Page. He targeted the western end of Keppel Harbour, managed to mine 3 ships. Now, these are all possibilities. The first one was Nasusan Maru, that was damaged. The second boat was Hakusan Maru, that was sunk, and Kitsu Maru, that had arrived in September on September 15th, and that was sunk. They all made their escapes differently. Canoe number 2, commanded by Lieutenant Davidson, island hopped and made it back to the rendezvous point of Popong on October 1. Canoe 1, commanded by Major Lyon, made his exit from Singapore Harbour to Palau Dongus and arrived around 5:15 a.m, with Canoe 3, commanded by Lieutenant Page, arriving a short time later, just as the first explosions were heard. They remained on the island until September 27, when the 2 canoes left Dongus Island, Highland hopped heading towards the rendezvous of Pom Pong. They arrived on October 2nd, but failed to find the crate. So they made camp before the crate arrived on the night of the October 3-4. The return home across the Java Sea was uneventful. Then as the boat entered the Lombok Strait at around midnight, a Japanese patrol vessel took an interest in them for a few minutes before moving on. The remainder of the trip was uneventful, with the crate arriving back in Exmouth on October 19. All those that were involved in Operation Jaywick were either given a Bravery Award or mentioned in dispatches. Major Ivan Lyon was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his efforts. He tried to replicate that success with Operation Rimu, which went wrong from the start, and after a series of gun battles with the Japanese troops, he was killed in action on October 16, 1944. He is buried at Kranji War Cemetery in Singapore. The boat that was used in the operation, Crate, was salvaged after the war, restored, and is now on display at the Australian National Maritime Museum.